Hey everyone, it's Samuel.
And I'm David Tilstra.
And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons.
Today, in the prime material, Nautical storytelling.
In the wilds, the Sahuagin.
And in the tavern, what would you do if you were shipwrecked?
All right, let's go. Well, thank you very much for joining us, David.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. It is a joy as always.
Having you back, of course.
Yeah, we did this. Let's see. This will be the third time because we did the first initial talk, and then we did the Plot Hooks Adventures 2.
Yes, I think the second one. Yeah, the second adventure. Yeah, we're excited to come back for the second season of that soon. We have one episode recorded, but due to some technical difficulties, things got pushed back, and the things which were supposed to be the finale of season 1 ended up now I think is going to have to be the start of season 2 because of all the technical difficulties with it. But anyway, we're happy to have you back on.
Thank you.
If anyone out there is unfamiliar with you and your work, if you'd just like to briefly introduce yourself and let everyone know where they can find you online.
For sure, yeah. So, like I said before, my name is David Tilstra. I am the Dungeon Master for the D&D actual play 5e campaign, The Quest for Atlantis. Yeah, so me and a couple of friends, we run just kind of a goofy, fun seafaring adventure where we look for Atlantis and try to make each other laugh. So, and you can find us on Instagram, on Twitter at From Afar Podcast, and our show is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and I think we're pretty much everywhere podcasts can be heard. And that, once again, it's a From Afar Podcast.
Yes. Awesome. Definitely check them out. And of course, as you heard there is a nautical theme to their particular adventure. And that's what we want to hit on today in the prime material. Before we get into that, though, just some announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on all our social media. You can find us at Plot Hooks on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure wherever you happen to be listening to the podcast to give it a rating and a review. It helps get the podcast in front of more people as suggestions and spread the word about us that way. We would also appreciate it if you could support us on Patreon. We are going to be revamping our tiers here shortly, just to coincide with some of the different offerings that we are doing currently as this creative network. We want to align to make sure that everybody is getting something which is advantageous and enjoyable for them as they support the show. But we really do appreciate your support. It helps keep us being able to make content and make it better for you each and every week as well.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who's listened to your show, it is very enjoyable. So everyone should go check out Plot Hooks for sure.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate it. Last thing I wanted to shout out, Disaster Hamsters. As of probably the airing of this episode, the official release date for that supplement has been released. As of recording, I don't know what that is yet, but be sure to check out our social media because that is coming down the line as we record. Actually, today I finished the first version of Disaster Hamsters, and we're about to get started on the second version, the fully accessible version of the supplement for those with dyslexia and visual impairments. So I should be able to have an official release date for you all, again, by the airing of this podcast. So please check out Plot Hooks on social media and our Patreon, where we're going to be sharing sneak peeks and stuff to get in early on the previews for this awesome DM's Guild supplement.
Mm-hmm.
We're so excited to share it with you all. But with all those announcements out of the way, let's dive into the prime material.
Yes.
Nautical storytelling. This is one of the most exciting and yet often underrepresented parts of storytelling. The nautical story, the life on the ocean, is such a fascinating element. And too often I think we settle for just traveling across the countryside in wagons or teleporting or doing whatever we happen to be doing on land, which is fine, and there's absolutely amazing stories we could tell that way. But
Absolutely.
There's a lot of great stuff which is out there on the seas, whether it's a tale of seafaring vagabonds with no place in the world, or sinister pirates terrorizing the seas, or just a normal party going through a nautical arc in their campaign because they have to get on a boat to get somewhere. There's just as much variety of stories that you can tell on the high seas as there is traveling across the countryside. Mm-hmm. And as we've already mentioned, you and the rest of the From Afar guys have told some awesome nautical stories. Tell us a little bit about y'all's adventures on the high seas and just kind of what sparked your interest in telling that type of tale.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you very much. We're having fun on our ship out there on the high seas. It's I mean, that's a good question, because when we started From Afar Podcast, I didn't necessarily know I wanted to do something like on the oceans, and also at that point I was very, very new to D&D and dungeon mastering and just, I mean, group storytelling in general. So like I was not aware of the challenges of running or like staging a campaign like primarily on the ocean. But ever since then, it has been like a super, super fun challenge and just like a very rich environment, honestly. And I think one of the biggest things that has drawn me to, I guess in this specific setting, I think one of the biggest things that drew me to nautical storytelling was just the idea of Atlantis. That's been something that's just always been like, it's a story that's always just been like super engaging to me, and just like, ooh, the idea of just this city that was lost to the tides or lost to time, whatever version you've heard. And I guess in my experience, Atlantis has kind of gone hand in hand with like pirates and the big warships and like out on islands and everything. It's just very nautical in general. So it was sort of, I guess to answer your question quickly, the thing that sort of drew me into it was almost like a side effect, because I knew I wanted to do something with Atlantis when it came to From Afar. And then just kind of by wanting to tell that kind of story, it turned into this like pirate seafaring adventure, which has been honestly a lot of fun. Like I said, I didn't know a lot of the challenges that were going to come about with doing like a show that was primarily on a pirate ship. One of the kind of side effects that has been really fun with it is nothing against travel in D&D. Like I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with travel, and a lot of things you can show, and there's a lot of cool character moments you can have. But one thing that I've found with doing From Afar, and like I said, primarily everything is on this pirate ship, I can be moving the players around and they don't really notice it. Like they can go have moments with the cook or the captain or the quartermaster, whoever on the ship, like the first mate, and I can just be moving them all around the world and they don't even really notice it. So it kind of allows for just sort of storytelling to happen in general without having to worry too much about the mechanics of travel. But like I said, nothing against that. And yeah, so I think I went off on a tangent there. So I think one of the things that has drawn me to nautical storytelling in general is I've always grown up around places that have been pretty close to the beach. Like I was born in California, and then for several years I lived like in Michigan, but then I moved down to Florida. So like in two of the primary places that I've grown up have been close to the beach. And as a family, we would always go to the beach on weekends or whatever. And there's something that's always just been really engaging to me about like just standing on the shore, looking out over the ocean, because the ocean, like there's so much history with the ocean, and there's so many stories that have been told on the ocean, and it is an entire ecosystem, an entire world, honestly, that we literally scratch the surface of as humans. Like majority of people are going to go swimming in the ocean, or going to go surfing, whatever you want to do, or ride on boats. And like, we're literally skimming the surface of this whole other ecosystem in our world, that there's so much mystery and so many adventures and so many stories that have happened around the ocean. There's something that's very engaging to me about that. Like being in this place that is beautiful and inspiring, but make one wrong move and it can kill you. Yeah. It's very exciting to me. And I think that's pretty much the answer for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We lose a lot of this with our modern sensibilities, and part of that might be just how fast technology moves nowadays, or perhaps just the way that you and I in the same age group have grown up in such a technology-rich world. It could be easy to forget that boating, that seafaring, has been of human history like 95% of human history.
Oh, for
like
sure.
There wasn't lanes to travel from continent to continent. There wasn't even for a while. It was hard to, I'm sure, get across the English Channel from the. You see stories about whenever Rome was fighting against the tribes that were up there in what's now the UK, and the actual crossing of that channel to get from what's now France to what's now Britain is a challenge, and
for sure.
and there's all sorts of stuff like that have happened over history, from explorers in more comparatively recent times, people like Magellan and those who have made the first journeys around the world, and people who went from different places, pirates. You have obviously the whole Norse mythology and everything to do with boating around then, even down to just canoes down the Nile in ancient Egypt. I mean, boating and seafaring has been such a huge part of human history. I mean, there's been whole societies, whole cities based off of their proximity to the ocean. It affects just your whole economy. I mean, it is one of the most impactful human made things on our world, is just the existence of the ocean. And there is just so much depth there, and so many things that we could draw out to tell great stories on it.
Absolutely. No, yeah, exactly. I mean, just look at like Venice, for example. Like it was it's literally built on the ocean, or a body of water, if not the ocean. And it, like, the way they get around is in these gondolas, and they take these boats everywhere, and it's just, I don't know, it's inspiring. It's very cool. Like,
yeah,
the water and what it has done for like you were saying, culture and exploration, and like, yeah, you could have these groups of people that were more powerful solely because they were better, like they had more advanced boats and more advanced skills on the ocean. Like the Vikings, for example. Like, I know they weren't the greatest of people. And I say this as someone who is of Norse descent, but like, part of their power came from the fact that they were just really good, like at being on the water. They could like take these boats, and they could go down the coastline and just take over other people who didn't have as much skill as them. And I know it's kind of a dark and twisted way to look at it, but like just the power of being able to not even control the sea, but like harness a little bit of human technology and learn how to use that, and how to use that in tandem with using the power of the ocean it advanced cultures faster than others. And it's just interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it affects things even to the modern day.
Absolutely.
In World War II, the naval forces of Japan and the U.S. in the war in the Pacific, the fact that the aircraft carrier became the be-all, end-all in that era, and the fact that the U.S. had more of them was just a big factor in actually the U.S. winning that war eventually. Obviously there's lots of other things that you could go into as far as military history in that arena, but yeah, it really is so impactful, and it's so deep. I think sometimes it can be easy when we're talking about nautical storytelling to skip over that stuff and just essentially treat the boat as a cart that is taking their players on fast travel from this island to this island, and not thinking about just the immense impact that the sea has itself on the story. It's not just, traveling across the sea versus traveling across the land. No, that is an entirely different thing with entirely different factors. And it makes for a really interesting either complete tale, or again just having an arc where it's a great change of pace, where your normally more land lubbering campaign can take to the seas for a few sessions and tell a great story that way.
Absolutely. Well, like that's one of the things that I've realized telling a nautical story is, if you're traveling in a caravan, if you're traveling with a group of adventurers, like with a ranger leading your way, and like you get ambushed by some bandits, if you lose that fight and somehow still get away, you can still walk and you can still travel and you can still move around. But like if you're traveling in a boat and you get like set upon by like a pirate ship, or like one of the ships of like the Lord's Alliance or something, and they sink your boat, like even if you survive, you're like the sea in storytelling, it can be your friend, and the fact that you're traveling on it, like you said, like in a fast travel, but if something goes wrong, it all of a sudden becomes your greatest adversary. And that's like a fun thing to play with. Like if you're having your ship or your canoe or your sailing boat traveling, all of a sudden a storm comes up, like all of a sudden it's like, okay, now it's your players and your adventurers versus the environment. And like aside from like an avalanche or a tornado or something, I can't think of many land-based natural events that would be as challenging. Like basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, once things go wrong on the sea, they go very wrong. Yeah. Because like the stakes are just heightened.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. And that takes us to one of the more interesting parts, I think, about DMing a nautical tale is with factors like that. I think we as DMs have a little bit more control over the narrative than normal, because they are locked to a boat largely. Unless they're actually docked in port, they can't move from it. They are just stuck there on the boat. Whatever encounters happen to come their way, they can't just run away. They could try to sail the boat faster away, but it's not that there's less choice, because they could still choose to sail in any of the different directions, but there is a lot more control in the background that we as DMs have over the narrative. And I think that is a challenge at times, because we have to be careful, I think, not to overdo it so that the players get a sense of choice still. You don't want to just, come out of the sky and wreck their boat out of the middle of nowhere with no chance of recourse, and just leave them stuck in the middle of the ocean, because that's something that is just very easily done whenever they're just stuck on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting that you bring that up, because that can, one thing that I've found with running a campaign on a pirate ship is, when those problems arise, like when those complications arise, just in like your day-to-day life, it seems to me like the players band together very quickly in a way to try to solve it. I know a lot of adventurers and parties do that already, but it's interesting because like I think there's that sense of like, oh yeah, if this goes down or if this goes bad, like we're all screwed. So we have to like work together. Like if you present some sort of big challenge like that to your players, it to me, from my experience, it seems like they have to band together very quickly and like work together, which is really cool.
Sure. But yeah, so that's one challenge that we have whenever we're talking about telling a story on the seas. You know, and you mentioned some of the others that you've kind of encountered in passing back earlier in the conversation. What are some others that you just kind of have figured out that perhaps you weren't expecting to have to deal with, but now all of a sudden there's, you know, this extra kind of thing that you have to think about in whenever we're talking about just the daily life of the campaign?
Got it. Yeah. Well, I think the first and biggest thing that I have to deal with on a daily basis is I actually know very little about sailing. and my players have this really, really awesome habit of asking very, very, very detailed questions about what it is to sail a ship. Like what does this kind of knot look like? What is this knot used for? What is this position on the ship called? How do we turn the boat around? All that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, it's part of the fun of D&D is like get to kind of make things up like that. But that's been one of the biggest challenges I've had to deal with is my players just being jerks and trying to trip me up in a real life conundrum of like, how do you actually sail? Sure. But then the another one that they do is talking about D&D specifically. If you do give your players or your adventurers an opportunity to be on a boat, just get ready for the amount of times they're going to try to jump off of that boat, and just try to think of ways to get them back on. Because I think almost every single time we record for From Afar, my dudes are jumping off that boat, and it's like, okay, well, whatever. But yeah, there's that, and but on like a little more of a serious note, one of the things that I've had to deal with is because we do spend a lot of time on the ship, or we've spent several episodes and sessions on the ship, finding new things to throw at your players after a while can be a little bit of a challenge. Because like there's one of the ways I've set up my ship is I told the guys right when I started, right the first time they got onto the ship, I'm like, hey, like I've designed certain rooms of this, but I want to leave it up to you to, we're going to fill this out together as the story progresses. And one decision I made early along is the geography of the ship and like the construction of the ship is going to be very flexible. So like we've made jokes on the show of like the ship is like, with all the rooms we've put into it and all the people that are on it, the ship would be like 10 miles tall. Like just this massive
TARDIS.
Exactly. Just like this massive behemoth of a ship that like terrors around the water. But that's something that was a little bit difficult for a while. It's just like finding, after the initial like excitement of being on a ship of like, oh man, like we're going to go down to the mess hall. We're going to go down to the sleeping quarters. We're going to go down to like the cannon deck. We're going to go to all these places. After they find like the initial places, it can become a little bit stale. Like if you run primarily on a ship. So just having a few extra rooms in your back pocket, or just allowing for the flexibility of kind of messing with the geography and physics of your ship, just to like allow your players to experience new things on the ship itself. I think that was one of the challenges at first, and I think we found a nice balance and a nice just a nice way to move forward with that.
Yeah.
But some of the biggest challenges I've come across are in From Afar. There's multiple different arcs that we're going to go through, and we just finished a completely underwater arc. And that was a challenge that I was not expecting to be as challenging as it was, but it ended up being really, really fun, really good. But there's a couple things that you just have to take into consideration if you ever do run like a nautical underwater arc. First and foremost is trying to figure out a way to get your characters to breathe underwater. That was a fun little thing that we had to deal with. And I mean, there's a plethora of different ways you can overcome that challenge, but and then there's things like heat and like how deep you can go down because there's like pressure and all this other stuff. But the biggest challenge for me of running something underwater was I totally forgot about this until I had my boys like 800 feet under the water. There is no way to talk underwater, and I mean there are multiple ways, but that was an oversight on my part. So we had to quickly kind of fabricate a situation or a solution in the show because like for a live game, like that could be fun, or like an actual at the table D&D game, that could be a fun thing where it's like you guys just can't talk to each other. You have to communicate non-verbally for this entire arc. Like, but for a podcast, that's a tough one.
Sure.
So that was a fun challenge. Like there's little things like that keep happening in the show that like I just don't think about, that like once we get into a situation, you just have to kind of think on your toes a lot of times when you're in these like nautical adventures, because there are consequences if you mess up. Like if I'm going to jump off the boat, I'm going to shoot myself out of the cannon 200 yards or whatever over the ocean. Like there's going to be consequences for that. So that's like, it's one of the things that I've come to enjoy most about running a nautical adventure is just the things that I overlook that come up in the game that you just have to kind of make a solution for on the fly, like behind the screen, or like as a group, like, oh, how are we going to overcome this problem, like together? And I think that's been one of the funnest things for me, is like it's sort of it's like a hostile environment. Like if you're on top of the water or underneath the water, and you just have to figure it out as a group. And it's just really fun. It kind of adds that little extra spice onto a D&D game, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be like there's like all the challenges, which there's a plethora of them. Mm-hmm. They seem to fall under like two different categories. One is you know, a lot of the stuff that you're mentioning is it's a ton of stuff that we just don't encounter in daily life. You know,
absolutely,
like we know from movies that you can't handle pressure, but like how deep can a person go without protection? Like, you know, that's something, you know, I at least don't know off the top of my head. You know, ship terminology, you mentioned the construction, the way that ships work, the all these little different things are things which we don't know. We know, you know, even though we've never walked from one township to the other, we know inherently, you know, more about land travel and land activities than we do stuff on the ocean. At least the average person does. And so there's a whole bunch of challenges which, as DMs and as players, we just kind of have to decide how we're going to handle whenever we're going to enter into one of these arcs. Are we going to actually try to spend 10 hours doing research to actually have complete realism? Or are we just going to kind of, you know, finagle it as it comes around, or somewhere in between? And, you know, so there's that kind of challenge to our nautical storytelling. The second thing is, you know, what you mentioned there in the middle of those, as far as keeping it fresh, because they are in one spot. You know, they could be sailing across the ocean, but they are still on the ocean in the same boat all the time. And so you have to almost be quite willing to transition into a much more role-play centric part of your repertoire of the pillars of D&D, you know, the social interaction, the combat, and the exploration and stuff. It's really, for most of a nautical adventure, it's just the social, because it's just interacting with the people who are on the ship with you, and the party interacting with each other. It definitely is a challenge, but as with all challenges in collaborative storytelling, in tabletop role-playing games, I think it's important that we talk about them. It's important that we are aware they exist, but I think that's just the important thing. That doesn't mean that we don't do it. That doesn't mean that we should shy away from it or be afraid of it. We should just be aware of what the challenges are so we can approach it in whichever way is going to work best for us and our group.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's touching on something that I feel like a lot of people do this already, but I feel like it could be done more. I know I'm looking at myself here personally. It's like having like a session zero, like a very intentional session zero of like, hey, like this is what's going to happen. Like you just said, like you're going to be on a ship for the majority of this adventure. There's X amount of NPCs on here, and that'll obviously change as the story goes on. But like, there's only so much we can do on a day-to-day situation. So like you said, it's going to be a lot of role play. Like, are you cool with that? Like, if not, like maybe we should think about maybe shifting the setting of this to a different thing. So, I think that's, I think you're exactly right with that. I think it's an aspect of the game and an aspect of these specific campaigns that you need to be very upfront about, because because some people might not be cool with a 3-hour session that solely comprises of role playing, like zero roles at all. Like it's just interaction with people. Or some people, like I feel very lucky with the group that I'm in right now, is we love role playing. So like it's kind of secondhand for us, is just like, oh, like here's the kind of the menu of NPCs. This is what I know that they know. This is how we've interacted in the past. Like, let me go see if I can strengthen that relationship with the quartermaster. Let me see if I can strengthen that relationship with the navigator of the ship. Like, this first mate, last time I talked to him, he told me off for something, and I have a problem with that. I want to go resolve that. So I think it can be very exhilarating, but also I totally understand it's not for everybody. So like, I think exactly what you said. It's got to be set up front. Like if you got to know what you're getting into.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication, as with so much of life and TTRPGs, important.
So important. Probably, I mean, in a game where it's all about talking and all about like interacting with each other, like you got to get that communication muscle very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. One final point I wanted to hit on this, and that is the ship combat. And that's not necessarily combat between ships. That is obviously a big element of ship combat, but combat when you're talking about either a massive aboleth or some sort of nautical creature attacking a ship, or just ships fighting, it's really intricate because it really adds a whole new layer to the combat spectrum, in that there's essentially a massive NPC that is a part of the battle, which does damage over time with its cannons and stuff like that, and also can take damage. And if that NPC dies, you all die because the ship is gone. So it adds a really interesting dynamic where when you're on land, if your cart or if your train in a more steampunky setting is off, you're not going to drown or be adversely affected in your attacks because you're now off of what you were riding on. No, now even if you're unhurt, you're swimming in the water, and things like your attacks are made with disadvantage and all sorts of different things. It adds a whole new layer, and that is a fascinating aspect.
It's really great. I love it because as a DM, if you're very intentional or a very detail oriented DM, like it can be a little bit overwhelming because there are so many mechanics for ships, and like especially now with like and I guess it's not really recent now, but a couple years ago with like Ghosts of Saltmarsh, they have some amazing resources of like ship combat, and like there's stat blocks for ships, and like it's if you're trying to go solely by the book, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But if you like you said, if you just treat it kind of like an NPC and have it just sort of kind of flow and interact with in these big seafaring combats, it can be really cool. Because one of the things I struggle with the most with like a lot of podcasts and a lot of like live D&D events, like when you're at the table, like when you're there with your group of friends and you're at the table, like doing these long, very drawn out battles can be like awesome. You're like sitting there with your friends, like, okay, I'm planning this out. I want to do this. Oh, I can only move 25 feet here. Okay, well, I've done that. Like it can be a super fun challenge, like working with your party, like in like a live setting. But with one thing I found with podcasts is it can very easily just kind of turn into this like sort of HP like slugfest of like, okay, well, I hit him again. And there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing that I always try to put into my combats is like just like kind of a layer of like dynamic of like, okay, you're everything you can be fighting this group of soldiers, whatever, but you're on the side of a hill. And like there's rocks rolling down at you. So how are you going to use that to your advantage? Or you're in like a very small alleyway, but like the walls are scalable beside you. And there's all these extra things you could potentially bring to the fight. And I feel like what ship combat does just on its own, it already adds that combat in, or it adds that dynamic in of like, it's like, oh dang, like what are you going to do? Are you going to like climb up the mast? Are you going to like, there's a bunch of ropes and cannons on the deck. Are you going to turn this around and bring this into the fight? Are you going to jump to the enemy ship that's trying to board you right now? Are you going to try to sink that ship? Are you like, there's so many things you can do in ship to ship combat that aren't just like, I hit him with my sword.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the, like the side effects of really, really cool ship combat. And then like, also just like the story, like narrative awesomeness of like, oh my gosh, you're flanked on both sides by these two infamous pirate ships. All their guns are pointed right at you and they're firing. There's smoke everywhere. There's people boarding your ships and there's pirates swinging on ropes and you're running out of cannonballs and your ship is going down. What are you going to do? Like there's so much that you can throw at your players, and it just it can be very exhilarating. But I do think if you're interested in running like some seafaring ship combat, like definitely check out the stat blocks on Ghosts of Saltmarsh, because it is a very good base to start from.
Yes. Yes, that supplement which came out a couple of years ago is basically just about everything that you would want in terms of getting started in nautical things. There's obviously, you don't have to take all of it if you don't want to go into such detail as you mentioned with the stat box and stuff, but there's even like adventures and stuff in nautical environments which can really give you ideas for just stories that you want to tell. So an excellent resource whenever you're talking about,
I would agree,
nautical storytelling.
Also, just like one final thing with like ship combat is, as like a DM, like just try to have some fun with it, because like there's so many things you can do, and I feel like instead of going into it with like, oh my goodness, I'm a little bit nervous to run this whole thing, because it can be overwhelming. Like just try to like relax and just have fun with it, because we've run one fairly large ship battle in our show, and it was nutty. I was absolutely terrified to do it because there were so many moving parts, but like once you fall into the rhythm of it and you're like, okay, the ships move at this time, like this is what my players want to do, like always kind of let them like lead the charge. Like the details of it melt away, and it's just an epic, awesome moment you can add to any great seafaring adventure. Yeah,
that's awesome. Great. Well, as far as combat with creatures and ships are concerned, I think one of the big aspects for that is going to be coming up next in our next segment. So why don't we just wrap up the prime material here and head out into the wilds and look at the Sahuagin. Here in the wilds, and as promised, looking at the Sahuagin. Woohoo! Sahuagin are fish people, but not like Kuatoa, like fish head fish people, but like creepy, like aqua colored fins on their faces, tridents and, like evil Atlanteans is what you'd picture these things as.
That's a
almost.
very good way to look at it.
They're very, very, very creepy looking and very not friendly. Their predatory nature and their brutality gives rise to what they're colloquially called, which is sea devils. They dwell deep in the ocean, places like giant caverns or trenches. Like think a place like on the real world, like the Marianas Trench. They dwell deep in those confines and come out to hunt, whether that just be other aquatic beings or if they want to attack a ship or attack humanoids dwelling on coastlines. They are just brutal and savage. And lawful evil in every sense of the word. You often find things in the Monster Manual which don't exactly quite line up to what you might expect, but I mean, they're lawful evil in every sense of the word. They believe that the sea is theirs to rule, and they enjoy their quote-unquote realm brutally, as if no one matters but themselves. But yeah, what do you like so much about these? You chose these for today's show. What do you like about the Sahuagin?
I did, yeah. I don't know, there's just something like kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like there is so much to the ocean. Like and yeah, it is a creepy, dark, scary place. Like it is the thing that I've been on the ocean several times, and I've had this thought almost every single time I'm out there, is riding in a boat, swimming on the top of the ocean, whatever. You're like, oh dang, I could be hundreds of feet in the air right now, looking down, and you're like, I can't see anything below me, and you don't know what's watching you, what's looking at you, and like just the idea of like these Sahuagin like creatures being down underneath the ocean, like with cities and tribes and groups of them like fighting off sea elves and fighting off sea monsters and like defending their underwater homes is just very, very cool to me. It's like, it's just a fun, like you said it right, like a fun, very creepy, just spooky place to be. And I mean, like the ocean is already spooky, and then adding like a type of creature that like, no, this is our place. It's just very cool to me. And I think it's, I just think they're great. I think they're really fun.
No, absolutely. I'm right there with you. They've got some great lore attached to them too. They are very highly connected with sharks. They worship the shark god Sekala, and there's 3 stat blocks of them in the Monster Manual, but one of them actually is a Sahuagin priestess. And there might actually be more Sahuagin stat blocks in Ghost of Saltmarsh. I'm not sure. I only have the Monster Manual in front of me, but yeah, they are very connected with sharks. They train sharks. They can be whipped into a blood frenzy just like a shark. So they have that really cool lore aspect to them. The relationship that they have with the sea elves and just the enmity, the war that the Sahuagin and the sea elves are constantly involved with is a fascinating aspect as well. There's lots of just great things about these creatures. And I honestly don't really know that there is a land equivalent of these, because you think on land, you're like, okay, some evil society which is very interconnected and very lawful, but lashes out and defeats things, and you're like, well, there's things like goblins, but they're kind of, they're much dumber and more goofy, and so that doesn't really fit with the brutality of the Sahuagin. And you have things like mind flayers, but they're much more insular, and you don't encounter those much. They're deep in the Underdark, and these guys come out of the water itself. They have their trait limited amphibiousness, so they can be out for 4 hours before they suffocate. So they can come out of the water and just attack a coastal town. I mean, I don't know of any real good analog for them on Earth. They're just a really interesting creature to throw at your party, even just as a combat encounter, just as them popping up onto the deck of the ship during night watch and fighting them. Hey, it's epic. It's epic what it does. Or just, having a more involved story with them, like the players getting involved in a conflict between sea elves and Sahuagin. There's even this element where if a Sahuagin is born too close to a sea elf colony, then they can actually be born as a Sahuagin, but with the physical appearance of a sea elf, and that's called a Malenti. And you can, have a sea elf on your ship that, come to find out over time, is actually a Sahuagin in disguise. I mean, there's so much depth to them that they are just fascinating creatures.
I very much agree. It's funny. I never thought about that until you just brought it up. Yeah, there isn't really an on-land equivalent. Like the only thing that kind of comes to mind, and you sort of touched on this earlier with like the religious aspect of Sahuagin always being very close to like Sekolah. Like the only even close on-land equivalent I can think of is like just a cult, like in general, like a cult. Like they kind of have, at least the times that I've played with them and run them in campaigns, is like they have this very tribal cultish mentality, which is really interesting because you can get very spooky with it and very creepy with it, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's a lot to even just improvise with them as well. Like, I mean, there's not a lot of lore official in 5e about Sekolah other than that he exists. It's, you could have them trying to summon him into, the earth and fill the seas with more sharks than water droplets. I mean, you can, there's some interesting religious aspects that you could take with them.
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to just be creative with these and include them if you're in any sort of maritime setting, even if you're not on the oceans as well. Because again, they could survive for 4 hours without suffocating. They can just, be Vikings and come out of the ocean and start attacking people. It really does. The more I'm thinking about it, it actually reminds me of some like DC comic storylines whenever people who have ruled Atlantis have been bad. And, the Atlanteans with their slightly increased technology have just come out of the water into a city and just started wreaking havoc. I mean, it reminds me a lot of that. I don't think their society is that complex. They're not that smart. They do have an intelligence of 12, even at the grunt level. Yeah. But, they're pretty formidable, and they can just come out and just start attacking things, and then it's a matter of you having to track them down, or you could use traits like their enmity against the sea elves against them in order to bait them out. Just reading through their lore, there's just so many different things that you can pull on in a given scenario to create an encounter which is actually going to lead somewhere and not just be a combat encounter with some creepy looking monsters.
Absolutely. I mean, just imagine how enticing and engaging it would be if like your story starts in like a coastal town and like people keep going missing and there's no, like, they can't find where these people are going. Like the only clue they have is like there's like kind of watery footprints like leading around the town. They don't know where to go. Like they don't know what that means. And then you find out that in the night, like these Sahuagin are coming up and like stealing people and taking them down to like sacrifice them to Sekolah or something. Like that could be like, that's just like because then again, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, oh man, like this is intense already. And then they're taking people underwater. Like, how are we going to figure that out? Like, it's just a fun challenge. And
and it's great. It's great for horror narratives in that way too. I mean, can you imagine, we say that they dwell in deep trenches, past a certain point, the sunlight just can't filter through the water anymore. It gets dark. Can you imagine kind of home brewing Sahuagin that have little tiny anglerfish things dangling in front of their faces?
Yeah.
And your party's just down there without much of a light source, and they see this little anglerfish thing, and then all of a sudden the Sahuagin just pops out in front of it, and you're I mean, that would be terrifying.
It's terrifying, yeah. When we did the underwater arc in From Afar podcast, I did not realize it turned out to be very, very spooky, and I did not intend it to be as terrifying. Like when I was initially writing it, I was not intending it to be as scary as it was, but like just exactly with things like you said, like that. Like I gave the guys like a light source, but I just kind of forgot about it as we were going on. Like then they were getting like to the final encounter down there, and one of the players was like, "Hold on, wait a minute, I just forgot. Like we actually can't see anything, can we?" And I was like, "Oh, it's like very limited." They're like, "So like we're fighting this giant Sahuagin Baron who's like corrupted and terrifying, and all we have are these like horror flashlights that we can see him with." And I was like, "Yep." And he's like, "Okay, I actually just got way more scared than I was a second ago." So, but no, yeah, they're a super, super fun, like engaging creature or a race. Like it's the one thing I love about the way D&D is set up in the monster manual and player's handbook is like, I'm just looking at the stat block here for Sahuagin on D&D Beyond, and like they give you just enough to kind of spark that imagination and be like, oh man, there's so many different ways we can go with this. There's like, yeah, like there could be a Sahuagin sea elf, just like a war going on, like underneath the water, like Sahuagin be coming up, taking people into the water. There's so many things you can do with it, and they give you just enough to get you enticed and get your creative juices flowing. And it's super fun. Like the one that when we were doing our underwater campaign, I kind of had one of the NPCs that I did not think was going to be as a I mean, like anytime you offer an NPC up to a party, you run the risk of them becoming like a crowd favorite. And I did not intend for this like assassin rogue underwater terror Sahuagin to become such a party favorite, and they ended up like traveling with this dude for a long time, and he ended up becoming such a fun part of the story. And because I hadn't intended it to be so in the beginning, I had to come up with like a story for this guy, and I was like, okay, why would he be down here? Why would he be helping these folks? And I kind of came up with the idea that he was like abandoned as a pup by his Sahuagin people, and through an intense series of events, he was begrudgingly adopted by this like sea elf family. So he, in his story, he kind of rides this weird line of like, he's Sahuagin, it is in his blood to hate these sea elves, but this offshoot of this sea elf tribe took pity on him and raised him and gave him life, that he was like sort of stuck in the middle of this like, I should hate you and eat you, but you protected me and gave me life when no one else would. And it was just really fun. Like you mentioned a while back, like you can get really creative with like this seemingly on the surface level, like simple looking creature, or simple like creature in the grand scheme of things. But like, there's so much you can do with it. And like, there's so much you can twist, and you can, like, if you want to just have them be these evil, people snatching water terrors, like that's a great story right there. But if you want to like twist it and turn it on its head, like speaking from experience, you can make a very favorite NPC, and then you can be that evil DM that just kills them in the end, and then just hurt your players.
Yeah.
So who's the real monster, the Sahuagin or me?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, they are classified as a humanoid. I mean, they aren't, monstrosities or anything like that. We mentioned their intelligence. They've got an intelligence of 12 or 14, depending on the specific stat block you're looking at. I mean, they're people. They've got kind of a messed up culture in certain ways. Obviously, I don't like making blanket statements for my cultures, even for the monsters in our stories. But they're people. I mean, and they can be modified in lots of different ways.
They can.
And heck, if all you want to do, again, is just a combat encounter with them and a bunch of sharks, because they do have shark telepathy, which is
so cool.
the best. It's the best named feature in any staff block in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, shark telepathy.
I would agree.
I mean, if all you want is a good combat encounter, they're great for that too. So
absolutely. Like, for example, like, again, sorry, I keep just talking about this underwater encounter that we did.
No.
The players were fighting this like group of like roving Sahuagin like soldiers, and they were fighting, they were winning, they're like, haha, yeah, we're beating these guys. And I was like, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, these sharks kind of came out of, like, they were in this underwater city, like they came out of these alleyways, and like the players like, oh dang, wait a minute, this just got a lot harder. And yeah, just solely from the fact that they can magically command sharks like with telepathy is so cool. I love it.
Yeah, they're awesome. I, again, highly recommend, if you have not used one, use one in your stories. It is excellent.
Agreed.
But I think that's about all the time we have in the wilds today. Let's head over to the tavern, get some refreshment, and wrap up the show.
Heck yeah.
All right, we're out here in the tavern. Today's plot hook: what would you do if you were shipwrecked? Ooh. Of course, you may have noticed the distinct lack of shipwrecked conversation in our main segment. Of course, that's a big part of the nautical experience. Whether it's through the effects of a storm on your vessel or the damage of a creature that attacked the ship, there's lots of great stories to be told regarding this trope. To a certain extent, I think this goes back a little bit to the part that we discussed about DMs having more control over the party on the sea. You know, it's really easy just to send a storm the party's way and destroy their ship, and they have no recourse. And certainly in some cases this could be fine. Perhaps they had a choice to travel through an area which was perhaps faster, but perhaps much more known to be dangerous, or maybe and they chose that route rather than going around. You know, but it could also be fine to have a shipwreck where there is some chance of preventing it, where, you know, you're fighting a creature, and if you defeat the creature, you save a ship. Or there's a skill challenge in the storm to actually bail out enough water or rig the sails in the right way to actually save the ship. So as far as the actual, you know, shipwreck itself, I do think there's a little bit of care that we have to take to make sure that the party feels a sense of choice, feels a sense of control, and doesn't just feel that they're on the water and you as the DM decided that there was going to be a shipwreck and now they're stuck there, and they just have to go with it. You know, again, that's perfectly fine sometimes, but something to be aware of as far as the actual shipwrecking itself. But
absolutely, once
we actually have one, there's a lot of different ways you can go once a shipwreck is actually happened. Did they actually wreck somewhere? Did they wreck on an island? Did they wreck on a reef where there's not actually any landmass? It's just kind of really shallow water. Are they stuck in the middle of the water? You know, there are lots of different ways you can go if this happens.
Absolutely. I think just the storyteller in me, that's just exciting. What you just said is very exciting to me. It's like you're kind of standing at like the front of this buffet and you're like, oh, what do I choose? There's so many good options here.
Yeah, I mean, you can, if they land on an island or just on a place nearby of something and they don't have no idea where they are, there's that exploration element and the role-playing element as you're actually trying to calm people down and deal with wrecked crew members, you know, trying to figure out where you landed. There's the survival elements, like they landed and there's nothing anywhere close by. How do they survive until they figure out how to get back? You've got role-playing roleplay aspect if they wreck in a town that they have no idea what it is and they speak an entirely different language. There's a lot of horror and suspense to this too. What if what destroyed the ship is still out there?
Oh, that's a good one.
There's the trope of just being stuck in the water. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of the USS Indianapolis, but if you are squeamish, I would not Google that. This was a ship which was actually in World War II in the Pacific Theater, which was actually on a secret mission, which was part of the problem because it wrecked. Or it may have actually been shot, I'm not sure, but the people were stranded in the water for, I think, 4 days, and it took so long for them to even be missed because very few people knew they were actually going anywhere.
Oh no.
And so it is an absolutely graphic story of shark infested waters and hundreds of men being stuck in the waters, slowly being eaten by sharks over the course of 4 days.
Oh my goodness.
And that is just like, you could, if you want to, if you're telling a horror narrative on the seas, you could do worse than researching the USS Indianapolis. It was a terrible tragedy, and but there is a lot of potential for a horror story to be told there.
Did I just take a bunch of notes? Yes, I did. So I'm sorry, Andy, Christian, and Goodval, but get ready. No, that's a good way to. I mean that. I feel like that's just such a great jumping off point. Like, I mean, if it's like the beginning of an entire campaign, or like you have some sort of like a ticking time bomb, like storytelling aspect of like, we have to get to Neverwinter in 3 days, or X, Y, and Z is going to happen, and then your ship wrecks. It's like, well, how do we get off this? Like
sure.
There's so many things. There's so many ways you could go with it, and it's just it's very exciting because like I think a lot of us. Maybe a lot of us. I know I have a fear of being stuck out or stranded out in open water, or like even stranded on a desert island. So like, just putting your characters in that environment is so visceral. Like there's so many. I know I've said this like 10 times in this last sentence, but there's so many ways you could go from that, and it's very, very, very cool stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's a game changer,
Absolutely.
Because no matter what you were doing before, or whether there was a ticking time bomb or not, everything has changed once, because you were on the ship for a reason. Either you were there running from something, or trying to go somewhere, or trying to do something. You were on there for a reason, and now everything that you were trying to do, every parameter has changed because you no longer have a boat.
Absolutely. And then like if on the backside of that, if your goal is to like fix the ship, like as a DM, you could have a lot of tools in your back pocket of like, all right, you fix the ship and you're sailing again, but none of you are like shipwrights. So like there could be complications that arise even after, like ramifications from being on the island could arise once you get off the island too, just because you got to fix something in a hurry or whatever. Like the ocean's awesome. It's an awesome place to run stories on, and everyone should do it, basically, because it's like a buffet.
Moral of this episode.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate you hopping on with me, David. One last time, if you would like to shout out yourself and From Afar, and just tell everyone where they could find you one more time.
Of course. And I mean, before I do that, Samuel, this is always a pleasure. And anytime you want to talk about anything TTRPG/D&D, hit me up and I will gladly spend time speaking with you. But once again, my name is David Tilstra. I'm the Dungeon Master for From Afar Podcast, and you can find us anywhere podcasts are listened to. Just type in From Afar Podcast and you can find us. And we are primarily on Twitter at From Afar Podcast. We have a bit of an Instagram going on, again, at From Afar Podcast. But yeah, come check us out on Twitter, and you can hook up with our Discord, and you can hook up with a lot of other a lot of other great people who've happened across us. And we'd love for you to stop by.
Awesome. Well, and thank you all for stopping by for this particular episode. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our Patreon, check out our social media for updates on disaster hamsters. Mm-hmm. And as always, again, thanks for listening from all of us here at the Plot Hooks team. I'm Samuel. Thanks from Becca, Izzy, and of course, podcast pupper Ellie. We will see you again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.
Bye.